Hampton Court Palace, 1530, and the most powerful non-royal job in England requires you to wipe the king's backside. Not metaphorically, literally, every morning, with linen, on your knees. The man who holds this position earns more than a judge, outranks most of the aristocracy, and has direct access to the king's body at the most private moment of every single day. He whispers into ears that shape foreign policy. He hands documents to hands that sign death warrants. He is, by any reasonable measure, one of the most influential figures in the kingdom. And this morning, like every morning, he is carrying a bowl of warm water toward a man who could have him executed before lunch. That is the job. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the men who held it were simultaneously the most envied and the most terrified people in Tudor England. And why the one detail about this role that nobody talks about, the detail hidden in plain sight in the palace records, changes everything you think you know about how power actually worked in 1530. The room nobody talks about, every great palace in Tudor England had a guardrobe. The word translates, with considerable diplomatic optimism, as wardrobe. It was a stone seat with a hole cut through it, positioned so that the shaft dropped directly into a cesspit far below, or, in some cases, directly into the moat. No water, no flush, gravity, and time. At Hampton Court, the cesspit beneath the king's guardrobe was enormous. It had to be. It served an entire court, and it was emptied by a crew of men who worked only at night, by law, so that polite society would never have to witness the process. Those men were called gong farmers. They descended into the pit physically, waist-deep in what the court produced, shoveling waste by hand into carts that carried it outside the palace walls. The fumes in an enclosed cesspit could kill a man in minutes. Gong farmers died in the pits regularly. Their annual wage was roughly equivalent to what a skilled craftsman earned, and they were forbidden, explicitly, from speaking about their work in public spaces. The man who held the most powerful toilet-adjacent job in England, however, was not a gong farmer. He was a nobleman. The Groom of the Stool. The office was called the Groom of the Stool, and the title is exactly what it sounds like. The groom's primary duty, as formally established in the Eltham Ordinances of 1526, was to attend the king during his most private bodily functions, to present the basin of warm water, to provide the linen, to assist, if required, with the physical act itself, to ensure the king's body was clean, private, and unobserved by anyone except the groom. This sounds like a punishment. It was the opposite, because the guardrobe was the one place in the entire palace where Henry VIII was completely alone. No ambassadors, no counselors, no rival factions listening at doorways, no Anne Boleyn watching his expression, no Eustace Chapuys recording his words for dispatch to the Holy Roman Emperor. Just Henry and the groom, in a room the size of a cupboard, for several minutes every morning. Those minutes were worth more than almost any other time in the Tudor political calendar. The Groom of the Stool did not merely assist with hygiene. He controlled access to the king's body, and therefore to the king's attention, at the moment when Henry was most relaxed, most unguarded, and most susceptible to influence. Every petition, every whispered name, every carefully casual mention of a rival's mistake happened in that room. And Henry listened, because there was nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. The groom was not a servant. He was a gatekeeper, and gatekeepers in Tudor England were among the most dangerous people alive. Who actually got the job? The men appointed Groom of the Stool were not low-born attendants. They were the sons of earls. Henry Norris held the position from the late 1520s. He was one of the most trusted men at court, a senior gentleman of the Privy Chamber, wealthy, well-connected, and by all surviving accounts, genuinely liked by the king. He had daily access to Henry's person that ministers and ambassadors spent entire careers trying to manufacture. In 1536, he was arrested on charges of adultery with Anne Boleyn. He was executed on May 17th of that year, on Tower Hill, alongside 4 other men accused of the same crime. Most historians today believe the charges were fabricated, a political purge orchestrated to remove Anne Boleyn and the faction that surrounded her. Henry Norris, the man who had wiped the king's hands every morning for years, who had whispered into those ears, who had been trusted with the most private moments of the most powerful man in England, went to the block. Proximity to power in Tudor England was not protection. It was exposure. The closer you stood to Henry VIII, the more completely he could see you. And the more completely he could see you, the more dangerous that visibility became. What the job actually involved. beyond the obvious. The physical duty was only one part of the role. The Groom of the Stool also supervised the entire Privy Chamber, the suite of private rooms beyond the public Great Hall where only the most senior courtiers were permitted to enter. He controlled who could approach the king's person, who could request a private audience, who was admitted to the bedchamber, and who was turned away at the door. This control was absolute and had no formal appeal mechanism. If the groom decided you did not enter today, you did not enter. If a petition needed to reach the king's hands directly, it went through the groom. If a foreign ambassador needed a private word, the groom determined whether and when that word occurred. The entire machinery of personal royal favor, the grants, the pardons, the appointments, the quiet interventions that shaped careers and preserved estates, ran through a man whose official title referenced a piece of furniture used for defecation. The Tudor court understood this perfectly. That is why the competition for the position was fierce, sustained, and occasionally lethal. There is a detail in the palace records that almost nobody discusses, and it is the detail that makes the groom's position stranger than it first appears. The groom was also responsible for monitoring the king's health, specifically the consistency, color, and frequency of what the guardrobe received. This was not incidental. It was medically mandated. Tudor physicians believed that the king's waist was diagnostic evidence of his humoral balance. If Henry's output suggested excess black bile, dark, infrequent, concerning, the physician was informed and treatment began. If it suggested excess blood, the physician was also informed. The groom was therefore the first point of contact in the chain of medical intelligence about the most important body in England. He knew things about the king's physical condition that Henry's ministers did not know, that ambassadors could not know, that rivals spent fortunes trying to discover through other means, because the king's health directly determined the succession, the marriage question, the foreign alliances, the entire political architecture of the realm. The Groom of the Stool was, among other things, an intelligence officer. His intelligence was uniquely intimate, and he reported it daily to the court physician. Below the groom in the Privy Chamber hierarchy sat the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, 6 of them rotating in shifts, sleeping in the room adjacent to the king's bedchamber, never more than 30 seconds from Henry's person at any hour of the day or night. Below them, the grooms of the Privy Chamber, younger men, noble families, learning the machinery of royal access by performing the functions that made access possible, carrying things, opening things, standing near things, waiting. And below all of them, performing the most physically demanding and least glamorous work in the most exclusive space in England, were the pages, boys, sometimes as young as 12, from families that had paid considerable sums to place them in this position. Not because the work was dignified, because the proximity was. The entire system was a machine for converting physical closeness to the king's body into political capital. The closer you could get to Henry, the more valuable you became to everyone who wanted access to Henry. You became a node in the network, someone who could carry a message, mention a name, create a moment. That function was worth money, favors, land, protection. It was also worth your life, if you misused it, or if someone decided you had. The lever, Henry's formal waking, began at 8 in the morning, but the groom was there before that. He supervised the preparation of the royal body before the public performance of the lever began. The warm water, the clean linen, the private guardrobe, the assessment, visual and practical, of the king's morning condition. By the time the first gentlemen were admitted for the lever, the semi-public ceremony of the king rising, dressing, being seen, Henry had already had his most private interaction of the day with the groom, in the room that smelled of what kings produce when no one is watching. The lever itself was a performance for an audience. The guardrobe was not. And what happened in the guardrobe, in those few minutes before the performance began, was the closest thing Tudor England had to an unscripted conversation with the king. The groom was the only person who regularly had one. Henry Norris went to the block in May 1536. His successor as Groom of the Stool was appointed within weeks. The position continued without interruption. The morning routine continued. The warm water, the linen, the guardrobe, the quiet minutes before the lever began. Because the job was not about the man who held it. It was about the proximity the job created. And proximity to Henry VIII was something that men destroyed each other to obtain, and were destroyed by, in turn, when Henry decided they had become more dangerous close than distant. The gong farmers who emptied the cesspit below the guardrobe worked in darkness, in silence, forbidden from speaking about what they touched. They died in the pit sometimes, overcome by fumes, and were replaced without ceremony. The groom of the stool worked in silk, in proximity to power. His name recorded in the palace accounts alongside the king's own expenditures. He was also forbidden, in his own way, from speaking about what he knew. And when Henry decided that knowledge had become a liability rather than a privilege, as he decided eventually, about almost everyone who got too close, the groom discovered that the most powerful non-royal job in England came with a condition that was never written in the Eltham Ordinances. You served at the king's pleasure. And Henry's pleasure had a way of ending without warning, in a room with a block in it, on a morning that had started, like every other morning, with warm water and clean linen and the careful performance of a duty that nobody outside the palace walls was ever supposed to fully understand. Drop a comment right now. If you had been offered the groom of the stool position in 1530, knowing everything you now know, would you have taken it? Tell us. And tell us where in the world you are watching from tonight. If this changed how you think about power in Tudor England. Like the video, share it with someone who thinks Henry VIII's court was glamorous, and subscribe, because next week we are going somewhere the groom of the stool never went. Into the kitchens, where 200 men fed 1,000 people twice a day, and where the king's dinner was assembled by people he would never once acknowledge existed. That video is already waiting.